Hello everyone and welcome back to our series of lectures on scale development. This is part 5 of the series. For today, I will discuss a couple of short topics. So by this time, you've already constructed your initial scale, you've already generated the items, you've already decided on what response set you will use, and the next stage of the scale development is one, to subject the initial instrument to content validation. So we will recruit the help of experts, probably 2 or 3 experts for this. And then second, we'll do pilot testing. And then third, we will prepare for the actual data collection, our large sample data collection, and what needs to go along with that data collection. And then finally, the actual execution of the data collection. So there are many things that we should decide on when we proceed, and those are the things that we will talk about for today. But before we continue, I'm inviting everyone to please subscribe to the channel. If the lectures and the tutorials have been of help to you, I would really appreciate it if you can support me and my channel by subscribing. Thank you very much. So right after we have completed our initial scale, the first thing that we have to do now is to subject this into some kind of content validation. In our mind, we have been thorough. We have considered how the constructs are defined. We have consulted the theory. We have generated the items to the best of our abilities. We have decided on what particular response set we will use that is compatible to the items that we have generated. However, we also want an unbiased opinion from experts. And so what we will do is to show what we have done, the items that we have generated, the instructions that we have crafted to a set of subject matter experts, experts in the field, people who are knowledgeable about the construct, but more importantly, hopefully people who also understand scale development, people who understand basic principles of good items, so that not only will our experts look into the validity of the content, but also they'll be able to check the technical aspect of the scale. So as it is said here in the presentation, people that we need are people who are knowledgeable in the content area, that will review our item pool, and also preferably those who are knowledgeable about scale development. Now, why do we do this? One, we want to make sure that the content of our scale is valid, meaning to say we want other people to check if the items that we have selected, at least based on how the construct is defined and how we phrased our items, do our items actually capture what we intend to capture? Sometimes content validators or our experts can also provide us information as to whether they think we properly define the construct or not. Now, perhaps they might have some additional suggestions. Of course, when you do this, you have to provide the definition to the experts. Oftentimes, when students recruit my help for content validation, sometimes students forget to include the definition of the construct, and that is really challenging for any validator to perform their duties, because how would I know if the items are measuring what you intend to measure if precisely I do not even know what you mean by the construct or what you intend to measure? And then in the form, there is some kind of rating. So it's either the validator will accept, reject, or suggest that the items be revised, and then they can comment on how or what kind of revision they would want for the item. So here is an example of a content validation form. This is for my dissertation, so I emailed a couple of my colleagues. So in the first part, I provided some kind of overview of what I'm trying to measure. In this case, I'm trying to measure meta motivation. I have illustrated through a diagram the possible dimensions of meta motivation. So in here, The literature suggests that meta motivation is divided into knowledge and monitoring, and then under monitoring, there's monitoring of level of motivation, monitoring of type of motivation. Under knowledge, there are specific types of knowledge, person-related, task-related, strategies-related. And essentially, my attempt to generate items are based on this particular conceptualization. So below, I showed the validator a sample of my set of instructions and my response set, and then the construct, and then how I define the construct. So these are the items. And so for example, for person-related meta-motivational knowledge, which is defined as students' knowledge of the topics, domains, or tasks they find interesting, enjoyable, or intrinsically motivating. So these are the items that I have generated. I know exactly what academic tasks I enjoy doing. I immediately know if I am interested or not in a topic I am about to study. I know my motivational weaknesses. I know my level of motivation in studying a topic compared to others' motivational levels, etc., etc. And then the validators will indicate if they accept, if they reject, if they suggest that I revise the items. In the remarks, they probably comment why they are rejecting it or why they are recommending for the revision of the said item. And so this is the rest of the content validation form. Reviewers can also evaluate the item's clarity and conciseness. So they can also comment not only on the validity, but also probably in the phrasing, in the clarity. They might suggest you replace a particular word to improve comprehensibility. Or they can also make even bigger suggestions, such as they can point out other ways of tapping the phenomenon that you have failed to include. Perhaps they might even suggest specific items. So after the validator has returned the document to you with all of their comments and suggestions, you now have to make a decision. Take note, however, that you don't always have to follow the suggestion of the validators. At the end of the day, the final decision to accept or reject the advice of the experts is the responsibility of the scale developer, and that is you. However, of course, you have to be very much open-minded, and you also have to understand where the validators are coming from with their suggestions so that you could really make the right decision on whether or not to accept the comments and suggestions of the experts. So assuming that you've already incorporated the comments and the suggestions of the experts, you have added a few more items based on their suggestions, you have removed a few items which they unanimously rejected, you have revised items based on their suggestions, you now have a relatively cleaner or a better version of your instrument. So the next thing that you have to do before your large sample data collection is to test the scale. And this is where pilot testing becomes important. So what do we do? These are just general suggestions. So one, my suggestion is you can administer the initial test to a few participants, particularly participants for which the scale is intended to be administered to. So for example, if your scale is intended for college students, then you would have to recruit college students as your initial participants. And of course, you shouldn't give this to employees if the scale is not intended for employees. How many participants? Maybe around 8 to 24. Or it can also be 3 sets of 8, which is 24. So what I'm trying to say is that you can actually conduct several pilot testing batches. So after you have administered your initial test, your initial scale to your 8 to 24 participants, you can conduct an FGD or a focus group discussion. It probably will be difficult to conduct a focus group discussion with 24 individuals. So my suggestion is that perhaps you can conduct FGDs to a maximum of 8 people. And if you have 24 participants, then probably you can conduct 3 FGDs with 8 people in each FGD. And what do you discuss in the focus group discussion? You discuss the test taker's experience, their observations, their comments, and what they can suggest to improve the scale. So here are things that you can check in the focus group discussion: their general experience. Do items cover relevant aspects of the construct being measured? So it's important that you also have to explain to them what the construct you're trying to measure, how do you define the construct, so that they can give you proper feedback. Are the items clear and easy to understand? Are the instructions clear, or do they have suggestions to improve the instructions? Did they notice any grammatical or syntactical errors? Are there phrasings that are confusing? Are there words that are difficult to understand, that which you can replace with a simpler word? Are there items that can be intrusive or sensitive or offensive to a specific group of people or to people in general? Is the scale too long or is it too short? How do participants feel about the time to complete the scale? So these are some of the things that you can ask or that you can look into when you conduct the focus group discussion with the participants. After that, based on the information that you collected, you can improve the scale once again. And then if you still have time, if you want to conduct another pilot study or another round of focus group discussion, you can do it again for further improvement. However, if you don't have time, then I suppose one round of pilot testing would be sufficient, for as long as you have collected the necessary feedback from the participants. So by now, you have a good scale, a scale that has been checked by experts, a scale that has been tested by an initial roster of participants. Now it's time to plan for data collection for your large sample. When we do the data collection, it's important to understand that you should not only collect data about the scale that you're trying to develop. It is strongly suggested that you include additional items or scales in the same questionnaire or in the same data collection that will help determine eventually the validity of the final scale. For example, you can include scales such as social desirability measures. This scale allows investigators to assess how strongly individual items are influenced by social desirability. When we say social desirability, there are some people who want to project a specific kind of image. They want to be socially desirable in the perception of other people. And so their motivation to be socially desirable might influence the way they answer specific items. Items that correlate substantially with social desirability scores can be considered as candidates for inclusion. Why? Because these items are items that are heavily influenced by people's desire to be accepted, which means to say that these are items that people tend to be untruthful when they respond to. Aside from that, you can also include other scales that are relevant to the construct that you are measuring. Including other scales can help you establish convergent, divergent, or predictive validity. For example, if you're measuring academic self-efficacy, perhaps you can also administer another scale that measures a similar type of construct, maybe school self-efficacy. In theory, academic self-efficacy and that other self-efficacy measure should be moderately to strongly correlated. And so when you collect data about the other construct, you can correlate your scale and the other scale later on to establish convergent validity. Or there might be constructs that you know is negatively related to the construct that you are measuring. For example, if you're measuring academic self-efficacy, then perhaps you also want to measure academic procrastination, because literature says that procrastination is negatively correlated with academic self-efficacy. That way, after collecting data, you can check if there's a negative relationship between these two constructs, and if there is, then that helps establish what we call as divergent validity. Or the literature might suggest that self-efficacy predicts some kind of outcome, for example, academic performance. So you might also want to collect information about their academic performance, and that way you can check whether academic self-efficacy predicts academic performance, and that is what we refer to as predictive validity. And if our tests of convergent, divergent, and predictive validity fail, then that might point out, or that might provide us some clues as to why some of our items or our scale in general might be problematic or might not be performing as predicted. Needless to say, if you are planning for data collection, perhaps it would be best if you subject your scale development proposal to ethics review, because if you want to publish your work, more often than not, the journals that you will submit your manuscript to will require ethics approval. So it might be a good thing to consider that also. And then finally, you're now ready to collect your actual data. And here are some considerations that you have to think about in preparing for that. One question is in terms of the sample size. We are normally told that we need a large sample size for data collection, for scale development, but how large is large? Literature says different things about this. So there are some literature that suggests that the sample size should be as few as 100. However, I find 100 to be a bit risky. I feel that 100 is not enough. Other literature suggests that there should be 10 participants per number of items. So let's say, for example, if you have a 20 item scale, then that would mean to say that you need 200 participants, because 20 times 10 is 200. Yet again, there are some literature that suggests 5 participants multiplied by the number of items is ideal. It can also be as large as 1,000 participants. Personally, I like Nunnally's suggestion of a minimum of 300 participants for a scale development effort. So generally, that's my ballpark figure for the sample size for scale development. Whatever sample size you decide to make use, just make sure that you have the necessary literature to justify your decision. So that concludes part 5 of my scale development lecture series. Hopefully I can do part 6 and 7 where I talk about exploratory factor analysis, confirmatory factor analysis, and reliability testing. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening to this lecture. If this lecture has helped you, again, I'm encouraging you to please support me and my channel by subscribing. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.